Could the New York Mets really sign both Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman? And if they did, what would that mean for Mark Vientos? I'm going to talk about it all on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, today's show is going to be a podcast that I recorded prior to Sean Manaea's signing late on Sunday night or early Monday morning. That news came in at 1:45 a.m. on Monday. I just finished off an entire show talking about the possibility of the Mets signing both Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso. What would that mean for their lineup? How would that impact Mark Vientos? We're going to have that entire show for you in this episode, but I thought it was important to, for one, react to some of the news of the day and also just put that caveat at the beginning before I put the rest of the show out there that everything I talk about, once you see the outfit change and the other part of the show start, was all recorded before Manaea signed. But there are some notes that I want to talk about first. Sean Manaea got deferred money in his contract. I did not know this when I recorded yesterday's show. Manaea, according to Will Salmon of The Athletic, will get $23.25 million in deferred money that will be paid out over a 10-year period from 2035 to 2044. So whatever that is, $2.325 million a year for a 10-year period. What does that do for the New York Mets? Well, this is the same strategy we've seen the Dodgers employ with a lot of their guys, starting with Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman, and then, of course, infamously with Shohei Ohtani taking the $680 million deferred. What this does is it brings down the average annual value of the contract as it relates to the luxury tax, because the luxury tax figures the present day value of a contract. So if a team has deferred money in the deal, it allows the present day value of the contract to go down, in which case you save a bit on the luxury tax. This was a team move from Manaea, and it makes this contract even more valuable to the New York Mets, because instead of being looked at as a 3-year, $75 million deal when it comes to the luxury tax, according to our cap experts on Twitter, it now appears like it'll be closer to $66 million over the 3-year deal. So the average annual value will be $22 million instead of $25 million. And if you are Steve Cohen, who has to pay the Steve Cohen tax, we're going past that $301 million tax line where you pay 110 cents on every dollar. $3 million saved in average annual value is $3 million plus saved on your tax bill. So that was really big because that just gives the Mets a little more maneuverability. And I honestly think if, and I almost want to say when Pete Alonso resigns with the Mets, expect deferred money in this deal. I've talked about this forever on this show. I have a graphic that's saved here in my stuff here on StreamYard where you can view this contract that I had Christopher Soto. You can find him at, I believe it's C803 or C Soto 803 on Twitter. If you look up Christopher Soto, you can find him. I asked him at one point, might have been during the season last year, what a contract would be for Pete Alonso that was a 7-year deal that got him to $200 million overall, that brought the present day value of the contract in line with the offer that he declined from the New York Mets, the 7 years and $142 million. Or excuse me, 7 years and $158 million. I apologize on that figure. But the bottom line from the numbers you're looking on the screen here is the Mets can defer, if Alonso got $20.5 million per year, they can defer $12 million of that, and that would bring the average annual value of the contract down to $22.6 million. I don't even know if he could get this deal now based on his market, and I certainly don't think it'd be 7 years. I would look at it more as a 5-year deal potentially. And so let's just say Pete Alonso signs a 5-year deal with the Mets. It might be reported first that the 5-year deal is worth $142.9 million, with $60 million that's later reported that has been deferred. What would that do? It would take a contract that on the surface would look incredible for Pete. 5 years, $142 million. And instead, it would make it more a 5-year, $110 to $115 million deal, depending on deferrals and when the money is deferred. But I really think that's going to happen here, where Pete Alonso is going to get a 4 or 5 year deal at close to $22 million per, with a lot of deferred money that allows the contract to look bigger, so Alonso can save a little face and also make a little more money. And I think the Mets would have no problem doing that. I know fans will say Pete doesn't deserve it. To me, Pete Alonso has earned every penny he gets in this contract with what he has done in a Mets uniform. And I feel like this would be a way where the Mets can reward him, deferred money down the line that Steve Cohen won't even care about, and the average annual value will be right in the ballpark of what they're looking for. And you can probably sign him on a 4 or 5 year deal. We'll talk about some of that, I think. I think I talked about some of that in the show today. One other thing that I wanted to note, a couple other signings around the league. Walker Buehler signed with the Red Sox. So that just takes another starting pitching option off the board. If you listened to yesterday's show, I pretty much guessed on that podcast, or I'm assuming at this point that the Sean Manaea signing is the last one that the Mets will make to address their rotation. If you want to hear my thoughts on it, listen to that show. But also Jock Peterson signed with the Texas Rangers, and it was reported the New York Mets were in on that deal. So I wanted to just acknowledge that, because I think there is a world where that interest in Peterson indicates the New York Mets are looking for a left-handed DH that they could complement with Starling Marte. And that would, in my mind, take them out of the Bregman market, or put them in a position where they would sign only Bregman or Alonso. And then you keep Vientos at third, and you'd have somebody be part of a DH platoon. Now that Jock Peterson is off the board, maybe it's Jesse Winker. So that's just something that would have changed my perception a little bit going into the show you're about to hear if I had known that about Jock Peterson. So I just wanted to give you all of that most recent information on what's going on in free agency. And now we will play what is a podcast where I really dive into the Mets going all in a very significant way. Could they actually do it and get Bregman and Alonso? We cannot rule Steve Cohen out. And here is the entire thought process around why the Mets would do it and what the impact would be on signing both of those guys for the upcoming season and beyond. And for those of you who missed Sunday's show, a lot happened over the weekend when it came to the first base market. We saw all the top free agent first basemen outside of Pete Alonso sign. Christian Walker signed with the Astros, Paul Goldschmidt signed with the Yankees, and then Carlos Santana signed with the Guardians after they had traded Josh Naylor to the Diamondbacks. So all of a sudden, all of these destinations for Pete Alonso came off the board, and we were wondering, where's he going to sign? And one of the teams I mentioned on yesterday's show was the Washington Nationals. They have a need at first base. They theoretically have money to spend, as Patrick Corbin just came off their books. They really don't have, outside of the Steven Strasburg contract, a lot of money committed going forward here. So they made some sense. Well, they got their first baseman on Sunday. They traded with the Rangers to acquire Nathaniel Lowe, and now all of a sudden, that's another team that could sign Pete Alonso that is off the board. I also will note, if you think, oh, would the Rangers get in on Pete? They already acquired a first baseman earlier this offseason, trading for Jake Berger from the Marlins, and so that basically was the move for them at first base. They're not going to be in the market for Pete. All of this is to say, Pete Alonso should be a New York Met. It feels inevitable at this point. It feels like the ball is completely in the Mets' court, and they should be able to get Pete Alonso to sign for whatever type of contract they choose to sign him to, whether that is a short-term high AAV deal or if it is a longer-term deal. And I talk about all of that on Sunday's show, so we're not going to rehash it today. Instead, I want to move across the diamond and talk about third base. Because as I did mention on that show yesterday, Alex Bregman is a real possibility for the New York Mets. Mike Mayer of Metsmerize reported this, and Mike has great information, really good sources. I trust him entirely when it comes to his Mets knowledge here and his Mets sourcing. And you can find him on Twitter, by the way, at Mike Mayer 22. He reported on Saturday that the New York Mets are showing continued interest in Alex Bregman. And when asked if that would mean that they aren't going to sign Pete Alonso, he said not necessarily. It could be both. So what we're going to do today is imagine that Pete Alonso is already signed. Does it make sense to sign Alex Bregman? Let's talk about the obvious pros, and that's the fact that the Mets lineup would be absolutely loaded if they signed both Pete Alonso and Alex Bregman. Just imagine this. You got Francisco Lindor batting leadoff, playing shortstop. You got Juan Soto in right field. You got Pete Alonso as his protection at first base. Maybe you're batting Mark Vientos cleanup as your DH. To break up all the righties, you throw Brandon Nimmo in the 5 spot as your left fielder. Then you got Bregman batting 6th, playing third base. 7th, Jeff McNeil to open the season. You see how that transpires across the year if one of the young guys pushes him out of that starting role. You have Francisco Alvarez as your catcher, and then you have one of Jose Siri or Tyrone Taylor, whoever wins that job in center field. Your bench, you'd have Luis Torrens, the other one of Siri or Taylor. You have to make a decision on Starling Marte. Do you keep him and just have him in a bench role, or do you trade Starling Marte? Can you find a suitor there? Then you have some combination of Brett Beatty, Luis Angel Acuna, Ronnie Mauricio, Jared Young, who the Mets signed to that major league deal. I did mention him on yesterday's show, and I did sort of question, is he on a split deal? What is this contract? I looked it up. He does have 2 minor league options. So Jared Young was signed to a major league deal, but he still has the team control to be optioned. He does not have enough service time. So this was a 40-man roster depth move where, yes, he has a major league deal, but he can be in Syracuse. It's just another option for the Mets infield. But the bottom line is your starting lineup 1 through 6 would be absolutely loaded. I don't care how you line it up. A lineup that includes Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, Mark Vientos, Brandon Nimmo, and Alex Bregman can absolutely mash. Beyond that, Jeff McNeil has the potential to still be a very good hitter, as we saw in the second half. If not, you have plenty of options in your minor league system between Acuna, Jet Williams, Ronnie Mauricio, even Brett Beatty to a certain extent, where I am very comfortable with this situation at second. Francisco Alvarez, you hope he hits more from your catcher spot, and you're pretty much just leaning into defense in center field with Jose Siri or Tyrone Taylor, but that's something that's important to do when you have Juan Soto in right field, to have that premier defensive center fielder. That's a team that both ways is exceptional because you are upgrading significantly at third base defensively with Alex Bregman. We're going to talk about Vientos more in the next segment, but the reality is, despite the fact that he played passable defense at third, the metrics tell us he was below average. He was -6 outs above average, -6 defensive runs saved. And if you don't know what those metrics mean, the simplest way to understand them, 0 is average. Anything above that is very good. Anything below that is bad. If you are a -1 outs above average fielder at third base, that's about average. That's okay. If you're beyond -5, you're -6 like Vientos was without even having a full season at the position, that's not great. On the other side, Alex Bregman won a Gold Glove in the American League this past season at third base. It was worth 6 outs above average and 6 defensive runs saved. So you are flipping the script on that entirely. The defense on the left side of the infield for the New York Mets with Bregman and Francisco Lindor would be elite. And what does that do for your pitching? Clay Holmes just got better. Okay? He's a ground ball pitcher. Frankie Montas got better. All your pitchers got better, but particularly the ground ball pitcher in Clay Holmes. That would be a huge addition for him. He'd be thrilled. And, David Peterson who gets the ball on the ground some. Like, that would be such a big thing to boost a pitching staff. It's going to be a little bit hard to add to. Jesus Luzardo came off the board on the trade market over the weekend. The Phillies pulled off the deal with the Marlins. So that's one more name the Mets can't, add this offseason. We'll see what they do. We'll see what that final piece is for their rotation. But we know the pitching still might be a little bit thin. Getting Alex Bregman helps your entire pitching staff. So that's why you do it. It's that simple. You do it for the defense. You do it for a better bat in your lineup, because if the Mets just signed Pete Alonso, and let's say the DH situation is Starling Marte as the primary DH, and then you are hoping a Beatty or Mauricio or one of these other young guys can figure it out offensively to help him out in that DH spot, or those guys might play the field a little bit, and you would slide Vientos to DH or Alonso to DH, whatever it is. If you don't sign Alex Bregman, you just sign Pete Alonso, that top end of what your team can be. It's just not quite as potent because you're either going to be sacrificing something defensively at third base with Vientos, or you might not have a premier DH. If you sign Bregman, Vientos becomes a premier DH. Your infield defense is better. And just overall, that 1 through 6 in the lineup is as good as pretty much any team in baseball. How do you compete with the Dodgers, who are going to run out a lineup that has Shohei Ohtani and Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman, and behind them you still have Max Muncy and Tommy Edman and Will Smith, and maybe they bring back Teoscar Hernandez, or they just brought in Michael Conforto this offseason. Like, how do you compete with a team that is that potent? You're not going to be able to match them with the Betts, Ohtani, Freeman trio. No team can put that together. But Lindor, Soto, Alonso, Vientos, Nimmo, Bregman, that might be better overall as a lineup because it's just so much depth of above average hitters. And if you got the best possible outcome from those 6 guys, it's probably the best lineup in all of baseball, quite honestly. That's how good it could be. So, yes, you look at this and you think, man, would the Mets really do that? It's Steve Cohen's team here, okay? And if he is that committed to go for it, why are we going to second guess it? But the question really then becomes, if the Mets did make this move, if they did sign Alex Bregman along with Pete Alonso, how does that impact the future value of Mark Vientos? Are you stifling one of your young guys who is cost controlled, who you have locked up for the next 4 years? Are you potentially hampering what he could become by forcing him into being a DH at 25 years old? That's what I want to talk about next. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish off the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's right. Now it's $250 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. What I love looking at, for one, is touchdown props, right? You want to see who's going to score a touchdown in a given game. That is an easy way to try to look at all your options, place a bet that you can win on that first $5 bet. You find a team where you have a guy that's just always scoring. That's the guy you throw that first $5 bet on. How many points will each team score? That's another thing you can look at. It's thrilling. Not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points each team will score, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for a chance at $250 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 12,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so Mark Vientos is 25 years old, and he is a fresh 25. He just turned 25 on December 11th. The idea of him being a DH next season, I can see why fans don't love it because we just watched what he did at third base, and he was passable. He was. He's got a strong arm. He's got limited range, but he's got a strong arm at the position, and he made all the plays. He really did. Was there an error here or there? Absolutely. Was there some plays in the playoffs that were hit to him when he was, in on the infield and he didn't make them? Yes, but ultimately, you didn't watch Mark Vientos and think, man, this guy is just terrible at third base. There was third baseman in the past for the Mets that I hated watching playing the position, and J.D. Davis is atop the list. Couldn't stand him because he double clutched on everything, and there was routine ground balls where the play was not made because J.D. Davis was tapping his hand in his glove, and the guy was beating it out. Mark Vientos had very good timing when it came to that. He knew his base runners. He made strong throws. He was in it. He was locked in, and I was very impressed with what he did defensively. With that said, he does have limited range. He's not good to his left. He's not good to his right. The defensive metrics tell us that that's wise outs above average, a range-based metric, was -6. Now, there's a thought that's out there, right? That the Mets should sign Alex Bregman, and some think don't sign Pete Alonso. Move Mark Vientos over to first base. Here's what I'd say about that, though. While Vientos could grow into being a very good defensive first baseman, I don't even know if I'd say very good, but at least as good as Pete Alonso, if not better, right? Low bar, but still. Do you think that Mark Vientos would be a better first baseman on opening day? And if you do, why do you feel that's the case? Is it because he was passable at third and we just think that first base is the easiest position to play? That's probably where people are getting that notion. Here's what I'll tell you, though. Mark Vientos has played about 700 innings in professional baseball at first base. Now, he came up and was drafted as a shortstop before quickly moving to third. I don't think in travel baseball in South Florida, Mark Vientos was playing much first base. He was, a future big leaguer on a travel baseball field and then going into high school where those guys are typically playing shortstop. And that's why he was drafted as a shortstop. But Mark Vientos has not played a ton of first base in his life. It's going to take time. This past year, he played 880 innings in the big leagues at third. So going into next season, the idea that Vientos would be better suited at first base, I actually don't think that's the case. I think he's a better third baseman right now than he is a first baseman, simply due to the volume of innings he's played at the position. Now, on the other side of the coin, Pete Alonso, like him or hate him, he's got nearly 7,000 innings in the big leagues at first base. That's a lot of experience at the position. So just that idea of, if you sign Bregman, make Vientos the starting first baseman and put Alonso at DH. You could grow into that. But I don't think on opening day, Mark Vientos would be a better fielder than Pete Alonso at first. Now, here's why I love the idea of having all of them, because obviously if you have Bregman, Alonso, and Vientos, your lineup is going to be sick. You're going to be loaded. It gives you coverage. Alex Bregman had a rough start to the season last year. Pete Alonso was up and down. Mark Vientos was great. Mark Vientos' offensive output in 2024 was better than both Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso. He was outstanding. With that said, are we positive he's going to be amazing next year? I've had Mark Vientos stock forever. When he was a prospect in 2021, I was talking about him on this show regularly because I love the numbers he was putting up. And you watched him in the minor leagues. You see these videos where Mark Vientos mishits a baseball and somehow it's a home run, in right field. How did he just do that? It looked like a pop-up and it went out. He has crazy pop. He does. But he's not a perfect offensive player. This past year, he struck out basically 30% of the time, 29.7%. In the playoffs, that ticked up to 32.8% of the time. Now, he hit well enough that you can just ignore that strikeout rate, but it's still there. You look at whiff rate. He was in the bottom 4 percentile of the league in whiff last year. In chase, bottom 24 percentile. Now, he makes up for it by hitting the ball really hard. When it comes to barrel percentage, he was in the top 8% of the league. But there are some holes in his swing that can be exploited the more the league adjusts to him. And I have all the confidence in the world that he can adjust back. And I really do think that he's going to be a 30 home run threat every single year, even in his down years. He's going to run into his homers the same way that Pete Alonso runs into his homers. And in his great years, he can hit 40 plus. I really think that. But there's still a world where Mark Vientos has some rough stretches. And I actually expect at certain points, he will be a bit of a streaky hitter, just like Pete Alonso can be at times. So if you have all three, if Steve Cohen decides I am all in to win a World Series, and you got Bregman, Alonso, and Vientos, you're banking on the fact that at least two of those three guys are going to have a good year. And if all three have a good year, your lineup's elite. That's why you do it. That's why you make the signing. And when it comes to the defense, Mark Vientos is never going to be carried by his glove. He's not. Now, in the last segment, we will talk about long-term what's best for Mark Vientos, and clearly that's to keep playing third base because that's where, for one, he'll eventually get paid, if he can prove by the time he gets to the free agent market, he's got 5 years of sample size that he was able to hold his own at third base, yeah, he's going to get paid way more as a third baseman than a DH. But when it just comes to the Mets winning, having all of them, it's a good problem to have. What would you do with Mark Vientos defensively? Yes, he'd be your primary DH, but you would get Pete Alonso off his feet a bit and have Vientos get some time there. You'd have him work a lot at first base. I think you'd also have him still get some reps at third base. You can slide Alex Bregman to second at times as well, because he has expressed that he'd be willing to move off of third base for the right situation. I think in this instance, he would still be primarily your third baseman, but let's just say you wanted Juan Soto to DH for a day and you wanted Tyrone Taylor to play right. Well, you could have Vientos play third, you could have Bregman play second, and Pete Alonso at first. You can move things around. You could be flexible with your lineup. And let's just say your second base situation is just deteriorating. It's not going well. And both Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri are hitting. Or maybe Jet Williams has come up and you found out that he is just great in center field and you want him to be your center fielder and you prefer to have Soto at DH and Tyrone Taylor in right when you get to the playoffs. And Mark Vientos is your best option at third and Bregman's your best option at second. You can do that. Maybe you see throughout the season, wow, Vientos actually is taking a first base. He's better than Pete. He can be your first baseman. Pete can be your DH. The defensive side of things can sort itself out. It really can. You're collecting bats in your lineup and having all of them, having Bregman, Alonso, and Vientos as the middle of your lineup behind the top of your lineup that's going to have Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto, and then Brandon Nimmo is somewhere in the mix there. That is such a loaded lineup. That's why you do it. With that said, are you investing in a position at third base that you don't need to, because ultimately you have a top 10 third baseman in baseball right now in Mark Vientos, and you're better suited maybe getting a stopgap DH situation for now, keeping your long-term resources more available so you're not just locking yourself into the Pete Alonso, Alex Bregman, Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor core with no maneuverability when you have an answer already there in Mark Vientos. That's where I want to close the show. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And Game Time has their feature, Game Time Picks, which will make it easier for you to get tickets for your favorite live events, because they're going to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste your time scrolling through thousands of tickets. You can view your seat before you buy, so know exactly what to expect before you arrive. You can see the sight lines and everything in the ballpark of the arena. And you can buy tickets so easily. A couple taps, you're all set. You can buy tickets in a minute. It's so easy. When you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB, because you're going to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, when it comes to this idea of going ridiculously all in and signing Juan Soto, Alex Bregman, and Pete Alonso in one offseason, essentially signing, I guess you could argue, the top three bats on the free agent market are three of the top four, with Willy Adames being the exception. That's sort of crazy on the surface to even think about that. But when it comes to that idea, is it worth it? My answer is, if it's worth it to Steve Cohen, it's worth it to me. Why not? If Steve Cohen wants to float a $350 million payroll for the next 5-6 years, let him. Why not? The Mets would be better with Alex Bregman. There's no doubt about it. And when you look at the upcoming free agent classes and you look at the third base position, next year, the top free agent third baseman would be Eugenio Suarez. Suarez is a really good player. I like Suarez a lot. And theoretically, if the Mets eventually had him on their team, I wouldn't be mad at it, because the guy's going to hit potentially 30 home runs and give you good defense. But he's already 31 years old. He'll turn 30 actually, or excuse me, 33 years old. He'll turn 34 in July. That's not a guy you want to tie yourself to long-term at third base. And then beyond that, you really don't have another top-tier free agent third baseman. The next best is sliding Bo Bichette from shortstop to third, but he's coming off a down year offensively. So you still don't know how he's going to enter the market, what he's going to look like. You look at first base. You'll have Vladdy, Josh Naylor, Lamont Wade, and then the guys that just signed on one-year deal, Santana, Paul Goldschmidt, Rhys Hoskins. Theoretically, Pete Alonso if he signs a deal with an opt-out on it. But obviously, if we're just talking about Bregman or Alonso, you could say for the future, it makes more sense to sign Bregman at that position because it's a harder position to fill. First base, I do believe that Mark Vientos would, if given a large sample size of playing time there, he would hurt you defensively less at first than at third, just because it is an easier position, ultimately. You also could say, well, sign Vladdy, right? I've seen a lot of Mets fans who are on the boat right now of trade for Vladdy and extend him, or don't sign Pete because you want to sign Vladdy. Here's what I'll say about Vladdy. He just had a quote where he was talking about how Ohtani changed the game for Soto, and now Soto changed the game for him. If he's thinking in that boat, and he also said that he is open to an extension with the Blue Jays, but they're nowhere close, and nowhere close is the fact that they already offered him a $340 million contract. So Vladdy's got his eyes at $500 million. He's thinking $500 million plus. He's going to be 26, I think, in free agency, just like Soto was here. I don't see it as a likely outcome where the Mets would have Vladdy and Juan Soto on their payroll. So I just wanted to address that because I'm not going to spend a whole show on it. But still, even setting Vladdy aside, with Josh Naylor as an opportunity or an option next year, with Ryan Clifford coming up through your farm system with Mark Vientos, it is much easier to fill first base. But if we're talking about Alex Bregman or Pete Alonso, then we have to acknowledge that Bregman has a better chance in this market to get the deal that he was seeking, to get the 6-7 year deal potentially. You still have the Red Sox who could be on him. You still have the Detroit Tigers that need an Alex Bregman to come in there and be the culture setter in that clubhouse. The Blue Jays, last-ditch effort to win with Vladdy. Maybe they are the team who's been also trying to get anyone to take their money, who signs Alex Bregman. There's teams that make sense. Pete Alonso, we talked about the market. It's just not there. That's why I still think Alonso is going to come back to the Mets. And probably at 80 cents in the dollar, if not 70 cents in the dollar to what Bregman's going to make, not to mention years. I think you probably can get Pete Alonso now for 5 years instead of 6, where Bregman, I think it's going to take at least 6, if not gets pushed to 7. And who knows? You might be able to get Pete for 4 years. You might be able to get Pete for the 3-year opt-out Boris special contract that everyone's throwing around right now. But again, this is not a Pete Alonso podcast today. This is about Mark Vientos and Alex Bregman. When you look at Mark Vientos moving forward, just going into 2025, here we're going to rank the top third baseman in baseball. Jose Ramirez is clearly number 1. I'd still look at the combination of offense and defense and put Manny Machado second there. Along those same lines, I might still lean towards Austin Riley as the third best, even though he's coming off a down season. Rafael Devers, when it comes to the bat, is probably second best to Jose Ramirez. He's in the top 5. And based on the season he just had, you might put Matt Chapman there, or you'd put Alex Bregman. Either way, those to me are the clear top 6 third basemen in baseball going into 2025. It's Jose Ramirez, Manny Machado, Rafael Devers, Austin Riley, Matt Chapman, Alex Bregman. The next guys after that, not talking about Vientos yet. You still have Nolan Arenado for his defense and his pedigree. You got butchered at that time. You got Eugenio Suarez, combination of both. Alec Boehm, Isaac Paredes, Jordan Westbrook is coming off a good year. Not sure if he's going to play third base for the Orioles going into this season, but I think with Jackson Holliday at second, that's probably the expectation. Max Muncy is maybe in there as well. So that would be maybe the next 6. I think Mark Vientos belongs sandwiched between that group. I would take Mark Vientos going into next year, his production, his WAR total by the end of the season, what he's going to give the New York Mets over Suarez, over Boehm, over Paredes, over Jordan Westbrook, over Max Muncy, over Nolan Arenado. I think right now you can make an argument that Mark Vientos should enter 2027 as the 7th best third baseman in all of baseball, potentially right behind Alex Bregman. And that is taken into account his glove because I think the bat carries his profile that much. So if you already have a top 10 third baseman in the game, why are you signing a third baseman? I don't think you have to. And I think you could keep yourself open to more future flexibility by just signing Pete and keeping Vientos at third. And if anything, go out and get yourself a Jock Peterson. Maybe it is Jesse Winker to platoon with Starling Marte. Improve that DH spot, but also leave the opportunities there for your young players to grab roles. Because while everyone else has, I'm not selling all my stock on Brett Beatty just yet. I still think he has a chance to be a very good big leaguer, and you never know. We might be having this conversation in a completely different context in 2 months into the season because Vientos wasn't hitting and Brett Beatty is hitting 340 in AAA, and they decided to bring Beatty back up. Or Vientos is still raking, but Brett Beatty is in a utility role. He's been grabbing some time at third, grabbing some time at second, grabbing the occasional DH day, and Brett Beatty's actually hitting, and all of a sudden you're starting to work Beatty more into third base, and maybe Beatty is that answer that we thought he was going to be when he was a top 20 prospect in all of baseball. And if not Beatty, you have Ronnie Mauricio. Maybe Mauricio, who everybody seems to love because he's got so much flashy tools. Maybe Mauricio ends up proving to be the guy at third base with Vientos at DH, or maybe it's Jet Williams because he can't play shortstop. You give him some run at third base, or maybe Luis Angel Acuna gets some run at third base. For me, at this stage, of course, if the Mets are willing to go all in on Alex Bregman and Pete Alonso, and Steve Cohen is looking at this window, which he initially said at 3 to 5 years, and we're entering year 5 of the Steve Cohen era, and he wants to try to win that World Series that he promised before he realized that he better, I'm not going to be mad at it. And I'm going to be thrilled to watch it because it's going to be a super team. It's going to be awesome. But the Mets don't have to sign Alex Bregman. They can re-sign Pete Alonso. They can keep Mark Vientos at third base, where he's a top 10 third baseman in baseball going into next season. And then they have these other guys where if Vientos doesn't work out, they have a few other options that might work out internally. And there's a world where Vientos hits, but one of these other guys hits as well and proves to be the better defender, and you're in that same spot where Vientos ends up at the DH spot. But I don't think the Mets have to address third base. I think they are just fine with Mark Vientos. They have to figure out first, and Pete Alonso is still the obvious fit to come back. It just makes too much sense now the way this market has developed, where they're going to get a steal on Pete Alonso one way or the other. I can promise you that. Whether it's because it's only a 3-year deal with opt-outs, or if it's because the Mets reward him for being a great Met, they want to keep him in a Mets uniform. Maybe Pete is just motivated by years. That's all he wants. And all of a sudden we find out, man, Pete Alonso just signed a 5-year, $110 million contract, $22 million per, and you have a big bat in your lineup for 5 years that you can easily work around as far as adding more pieces in because it's not $30 million. Or like Vladdy might be $35 million at first base. It could end up being, hey, we're rewarding Pete and we're giving him that 6-year deal. But guess what? It's coming in at $18 million per. It could be something crazy. We really don't know. So at this point, we sit back, we wait and see what happens. But there is a world where Steve Cohen goes crazy here. And maybe the market doesn't develop for either for either Alonso or Bregman. And he just swings the major move to get both. And if that's the case, he probably bails Scott Boras out of what started as an amazing offseason that could kind of spiral on him. But we'll see how it all shakes out. For now, I believe the Mets have their third baseman of the future in place with Mark Vientos. But I do think it's a spot that they could upgrade on. and Bregman would be an upgrade for the next 6 years. He just would. So we'll see what the Mets decide to do. Anyway, though, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Maybe there'll be one more pre-Christmas move we can react to on tomorrow's show. But until then, as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Watch it on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen, your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. Covers everything. World of sports. We're talking about Locked On Sports today with our local hosts from each team, our league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.